Hi, folks. You're very welcome to this week's episode of Genos Live. Delighted to welcome you here on a Wednesday morning, which here in Kildare in Ireland is freezing cold. So I hope it's a little better where you happen to be. We'll dive into our the main thrust of the session shortly, and I'll introduce you to our wonderful panel. But before we do that, let me just ask you, where are you joining us from this morning? We always have a very, very varied audience coming in from lots of places around the place, sometimes parts of the world where we haven't even reached out specifically, trying to get invitations out to you. So we love to see people coming in from all of the exotic four corners of the world. So do us a favor and just pop into the chat where you're joining us from. And while you're doing that and letting us know where you're joining from, I am going to introduce our panel. So you've got me up in the top left, which is, and I'm Derek McCann. Over here, you got on the right-hand side, you got Aoife. And those of you who are familiar with Genos and Genos webinars and Genos Live and so on and so forth, you'll know Aoife and you'll know what she does. And down below Aoife is Kirsten Kirsteiger. And I hope I'm making a good enough fist of that, Kirsten. And then off to the left, Rachel Vecht. So let me just invite Aoife for a moment just to really quickly introduce herself and talk to us about the way we're going to handle the chat and all that sort of stuff. And then I'll ask the other two ladies just to tell us very quickly or to say a very quick hello. So Aoife, morning.
Hello, morning. Hi, Derek. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Kirsten. Welcome back, everyone, to Genos Live. Delighted to have you with us today. And very excited to have Rachel and Kirsten join us as our panelists today. So our first ever panelists on Genos Live. We are honored that you decided to join us. Both of these ladies also happen to be Genos certified emotional intelligence practitioners. So who better to come and help us speak about emotional intelligence today? So what we are going to do today, we are streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and of course, LinkedIn Live. And we do have a short, 10-second delay between the comments coming in and the live broadcast. So please do let us know where you're dialing in from today. And please do, if you have any questions for us today, if you're a coach, consultant, and trainer interested in finding ways to explain emotional intelligence to your clients, or if you're working internally and you're looking for ways to kind of verbalize the importance of emotional intelligence, that's what you're going to walk away today. Or if you're a parent or a carer of a child, you'll also walk away perfectly capable to explain EI to a 10-year-old or anyone else. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to our panelists today. Firstly, we have Rachel Vecht, the founder of Educating Matters. And we have had the pleasure of hosting Rachel with us before as a keynote speaker in the past. Rachel's team work with diversity, equity, and inclusion teams, learning and development, well-being, and HR, a variety of other areas. And they provide guidance on inclusion, changing cultures, and bespoke training. They also offer practical parenting tips, support, and guidance in schools and to individual parents and carers. I would definitely recommend subscribing to Rachel's newsletter. There's so much wonderful content in there, and she's going to share a little bit with us later about her new online parenting course that is really, really exciting. And we'll share links to everyone's websites and newsletters in the chat and follow-up email. And then secondly, we have Kirsten joining us today, who is a scientist turned life and leadership coach. She offers coaching that includes tools of EI, respectful parenting, and leadership training that helps her clients define their leadership state, find their work-life flow, and give them tools for a successful career. And she's also the host of the Work-Life Flow podcast, which you can catch on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So that's it. Welcome, folks, to Genos Live. Really great to have you with us today. So I'm going to be here behind the scenes, monitoring the chat, feeding that back to both of you. I know Derek has a brief presentation for us this morning, and then we're going to be jumping in and out to the panelists for questions and discussion. That's it.
Great, super. And tell me, Aoife, anything coming in from where people are joining us from?
Yes, of course. We have a flood of folks again from all over. Crisp Galway in Ireland, Portugal, Bangalore in India. Hi, Vanita, welcome. Dawn's joining us from Killarney in Ireland. Wow. Radha dialing in from Singapore. Good to see you, Radha. Holly's joining us on our team from Carlow, Ireland. Lebanon, Reading in England, the east coast of Australia. Hobart, Tasmania, Switzerland, and Tasmania again. Welcome all over the world.
Great, thank you very much. And before we move on and move into the content, let me once again just add to Aoife's thank you very much, Rachel and Kirsten, for being with us here this morning, and especially for being in that little bit early just to get all the technical stuff working, because we're on, I think, our third or fourth of these episodes, and there are still those last minute kind of oh my God moments when you're trying to get the software working. So really appreciate you being in to help us with that. So let me just go back to where we were there before. So my name is Derek McCann. I am not going to spend a huge amount of time on an advertisement, but let me just tell you that I am a director of Genos International EU. We're an emotional intelligence organization specializing in emotional intelligence assessments, emotional intelligence training, and particularly over the last couple of years in a lot of resilience and well-being training. One of the things that has been really instrumental in us building a community of more than 7,500 people worldwide is our certified practitioner program. We certify people to deliver solutions in emotional intelligence, and we've won over the last 5 years. In fact, I don't have the badge there yet. We just, at the end of last year, we got the 5th badge. Over the last 5 years, we've been one of the top 20 assessment companies in the world. So that's the advertisement over. That's what we do. You've already met our panelists, and once again, many thanks to them. Last week, we asked you, we said, besides the topics that we laid out for you that we're going to cover over the next couple of months, we said, what other topics would turn you on? What else would you like to see us cover for you? And several people came up with themes around team coaching or coaching and leading teams through change and so on and so forth. So as the genie in the lamp would say, your wish is our command. In the intervening week, we have put 2 more guests onto our list, onto our agenda for this year. The first one of them, for anybody in coaching, I think you probably heard of this gentleman, David Clutterbuck. He really genuinely is one of the fathers of modern coaching. He's the author of more than 50 books. One of which, and the most recent of which, is Coaching a Team at Work. If you've seen him recently, you'll have seen him most likely talking about coaching teams. So he is the man on this, and we have him coming up later in the year. We also have the former director of talent acquisition for Amazon, who's also the author of Building a Coaching Culture, and that's Andreas van der Heijn. And Andreas is coming on to us again to talk about how you build a coaching culture wherein people or leaders coach their teams. So keep the ideas coming. If there are other topics that you want to see covered during the year, pop them into the chat or communicate it with us afterwards, because it really helps when we have requests from you to reach out to people and say, hey, look, we've had 2,000 requests from people for this, that, and so on. So 2 more people who are coming along. Today's topic is how to explain emotional intelligence to a 10-year-old. And when I put that topic up in the first instance, my idea was that if you could explain something like emotional intelligence to a 10-year-old, well, you should be able to explain it to anybody else. And one of the perennial issues that people have is when they are convinced of emotional intelligence, how do they convince other people who are not as aware of the topic as they are? And so that's what this whole session is about. So that's what we're going to dive into in a moment. But before we do, let me just tap into a little bit of the why of emotional intelligence. I think it's really important to have a sense of why are we even talking about this topic, because it's been really, really hot over the last 5 or 6 years, over the last 20 years really, but particularly over the last 5 or 6 years. This is a meta-analysis that is done in the technical manual for our assessment by our development team of a lot of the research that's out there in emotional intelligence. And what you're seeing in the brackets in brief is the percentage contribution that emotional intelligence makes to each of these different factors. So let's say in terms of, let's just pick sales performance because it's a nice simple one. Essentially what the 23% means is that if you were in the way that we define it and the way that we measure it, if you were of reasonable emotional intelligence, well, then you would be 23% of the way towards being a performant salesperson. If, for example, you're already a good performing salesperson, well, then raising your emotional intelligence has about as much as a 23% potential impact upon your performance. So you see, with leadership effectiveness, and this is why leaders look a lot at EI, you can potentially increase the effectiveness of a leader of up to 36%. Now, I'm not going to go through each of these, but you notice a couple of them down along there, like occupational stress. Really, really hot topic right this moment in HR circles because of the pandemic, and creating an emotionally intelligent environment and helping people to be more emotionally intelligent has a dramatic impact on stress. So bottom line is EI impacts pretty much everything we care to measure in business. And this is not just that our research saying that. What you're seeing, if you go in and you dive in and you talk about, for example, you put in the search term AI and the EI into your browser, you'll get a lot of articles like this from the Harvard Business Review. And what they've been saying over the last 4 or 5 years is that as we move into an age where more and more things are being done by AI-enabled software, the very things that make us human, the ability to motivate, to listen, to persuade, to empathize, those very human things are the things that are going to help us differentiate ourselves in an age when many other skills are going to disappear. On top of that, we have people like Capgemini, who just at the beginning of 2020, did a very, very major study on the impact of emotional intelligence. And I'm going to have to put my glasses on just to have a look at a couple of these things. But look at what their meta-analysis shows emotional intelligence impacts. Pretty much anything that we care to measure in business. So whether it's emotional and mental well-being, which is very, very hot at the moment and very important, reduced fear of job loss, increase in productivity and efficiency, higher employee satisfaction, pretty much everything that we care about measuring in a business sense is impacted by emotional intelligence. Now, what's really interesting is despite the fact that the World Economic Forum, that LinkedIn, that research from Capgemini, that articles in Harvard Business Review are saying this, we still don't have organizations focused upon bringing emotional intelligence down from the leadership right down into the troops. And what Capgemini's research suggests, very, very simply, is that that's going to change over the next couple of years. And in fact, what they've said is that the demand for emotional intelligence skills will increase 6-fold in the next 5 years. So it means that if you're in any role that has anything to do with improving the performance and the effectiveness of people, you're going to want to be interested in emotional intelligence. It's against that background that we're doing this session, because what's clear is despite the fact that there's all this talk about the importance of emotional intelligence, the message still hasn't gotten out to everybody. And so that suggests that you and I, when we're doing our missionary work communicating the importance of emotional intelligence, we may meet some barriers. So let me, before we start, suggest to you or ask you just to pick up your telephone and put your camera over that QR code up in the top left-hand corner, and it'll invite you to open up a poll. And I'd just be curious for you to tell me, how confident are you right now that you could explain EI to a 10-year-old? Now, by the way, if you have problems with QR codes or can't figure that stuff out, you see in the top line there, let me see if I can do this, in the top line there, yes, there it is. You can go to pollev.com/DerekM and 3 zeros at the end, and you can get in there. But just while we're waiting, because there's always a little bit of a delay in getting responses back on the poll when it's streaming, let me just bring our panel back in. And Rachel currently is working on developing a parenting course that actually has a module in there on communicating emotional intelligence to children. I'm just wondering, Rachel, just in 1 or 2 seconds or 1 or 2 minutes while we're waiting for the poll results to come in, can you tell me what are 1 or 2 things that you need to be mindful of if you are trying to get this across to a real 10-year-old?
Well, it's really about helping. I mean, I used to be a teacher, so I worried quite a bit in the past about the academics. But you talk about AI versus EI. I'm all about IQ versus EQ or EI. But really teaching children from a very young age how to articulate and manage their emotions, I passionately believe is the most fundamental life skill. It helps them, builds their resilience, their connection, nurturing positive relationships, and really also how parents can help their children to feel respected, valued, heard, and understood. Because, of course, adults are modeling that to their children. So if all the adults in the world are teaching kids to be emotionally intelligent, we might be out of a job, Derek, when those kids
Wouldn't
grow up.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you very much for that, Rachel. One of the things that's interesting is people very frequently, when they go through our programs and when they go through our certification, one of the comments that's very common is I wish I had known this earlier. I wish I knew this when I was younger. Imagine a world where we start actually educating right from the seed. We start educating our children into emotional intelligence early on. Imagine the impact that could have. So yeah, thank you for that, Rachel. Let me just have a look. So what have we got on the poll? Nobody is highly confident that they could explain it to a 10-year-old. Some about half are moderately confident, some slightly, and some not at all. Well, let's see if we can shift that. What we're going to do is we're going to move in, do a very, very quick exercise, and see if we can get to a point where we can improve those results. And what I'm hoping to see is that we swing all or most of you up to kind of highly and moderately confident that you could. So let's first look at what is the impact of emotional intelligence on I talk about the workplace here, but it's in the workplace and it's at home and it's pretty much everywhere. So I'm going to take you back in time to a time when you worked with a couple of different people of different levels of emotional intelligence. And I'm going to ask you to think what it was like to work with those folks. And let me invite you, some of you, I see some of the names that were on there, you're familiar with this exercise. And what I would encourage you to do is engage with it anyway. One, because it'll just help the poll numbers there as well and help the illustration. But two, it's really, really useful just to reflect on how people make you feel. So I want you to think of the best boss that you ever worked for. Now, I don't want you to put it in the chat because I'm going to ask you the other side of that coin in a moment. So just think of the best boss you ever worked for and write their name or initials down. And the idea of writing the name and initials down is just to kind of bring them into your mind and bring them back to your consciousness, if you like. Because I'm going to ask you to think a little bit about the way, as I would call it, the way they showed up. So I'm going to put up on the screen, one by one, I'm going to put up 6 specific behaviors, and I'm going to ask you to tell me the extent to which they demonstrated those behaviors. And the easiest way to rate those is on a scale of 1 to 5. So 5 would be they demonstrated these behaviors more than I would notice those behaviors being demonstrated by other people. 3 is they demonstrate them about the same as most people I know, and 1 is they demonstrated them significantly less. So, for example, if one of the behaviors, and it's not, if one of the behaviors was told incredibly funny stories, well, that person who always had a quip, always had a pun, always had a joke ready to go, would probably score a 5. Whereas the person who was kind of humor bypassed or had that graveyard humor would probably be somewhere around a 2 or a 1. So let me give you the behaviors and go with your gut on this. Just write down on a page there in front of you, just write down the scores. And please, please, please be sure to write them down, because later on I'm going to ask you to share those with us back to the screen in the form of a poll. So the first one, to what extent did that best boss you ever worked for demonstrate awareness of his or her mood and emotions? To what extent was it obvious that they knew when they were particularly in down form or angry form or negative sort of form? To what extent did you have a sense that they really were kind of self-aware. So 5 is more than the average, 1 is a whole lot less than the average, and 3 is somewhere in between. So 5 high, 1 low. Write down a score for that somewhere. Second one, very easy. To what extent did this person make you and others feel appreciated? It's amazing how easy it is to make somebody feel appreciated. It can be as simple as acknowledging their existence or just saying thank you. But we all know when we feel appreciated. We all know when somebody appreciates us. 5 is this person appreciated everybody all the time. 1 is they appreciated nobody ever. And 3 is somewhere in between. Here's the tough one. It's very easy for me to be open and honest about your mistakes, but about my mistakes, not so easy. So the 5 is, sorry guys, I dropped the ball, I screwed up, that was all on me. And 1 is, I wasn't there, it wasn't me. I think it was Aoife or whomever else happens not to be in the room. So to what extent were they open and honest about their mistakes? 5, scrupulously so, and 1, not at all. So again, please, 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 be sure to write down the score. To what extent did they do the right thing? Here I say make ethical decisions, but to what extent, when the chips were down and there was a decision to be made and the right thing was not necessarily the comfortable thing, to what extent did they do that right thing? To what extent were they moral, ethical, straight, honest in their decisions and the things that they did? 5, absolutely, totally, always took the high road, and 1 took the easy road, the expedient approach. So again, please write down the score, 5 high, 1 low. Here's a great one. At the 5 end of this scale is the Zen master. Somebody, we all get sad, bad, and mad, and we all experience times when we're experiencing emotions that are less than useful or less than effective in the workplace. And some people act out upon them most of the time, and some people don't act out on them most of the time. So a 5 on this is somebody that you knew when they were under pressure that they were able to just maintain their composure anyway. So that kind of Zen master, okay, the wheels have come off, everything's gone wrong, but don't worry, we'll be all right, chill. And 1 is the firework. Something goes wrong, it's like lighting the blue paper, badoom. So to what extent, what was this best boss like? 5, the Zen master, or 1, the firework? And then finally, and this is real leadership 101, you learned this first time you read any book on leadership, it said give people recognition for a job well done. To what extent did this person recognize a job well done? Did they catch people doing the right thing? And when they did, call it out in front of people around them. 5 is they recognized hard work in everybody on as many occasions as they had the opportunity to do. And 1 is, yeah, they didn't recognize anybody for anything at all. My mum has an expression, she says, eaten bread is soon forgotten. And a 1's attitude is basically that eaten bread is soon forgotten. You've done what you did. What recognition do you need more than the check that we give you every month? So 5 is high, 1 is low. Do me a favor, add those scores together, write them down, write down the score, and we're going to come back to it in a moment. Now, let me ask you, when you spent time with this person, how did they make you feel? Now, you notice the question I ask is, how did you feel around this person? Because last time I had this up and it said, how did they make you feel? Somebody said, nobody makes you feel anything. But the reality is that we are all, when we interact with people, a source either for making them feel more positive and up, or more negative and down. And it varies from time to time. But in general, what are the first 3 words that come into your mind when you think about this person? How did they generally make you feel? Did they make you feel sad, depressed, and down, happy, valuable, upbeat, engaged? Whatever it happens to be, just write down the first 3 words that come into your mind. And by the way, please, 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 I know I sound like a broken record, but please write them down because I am going to ask you to anonymously contribute them in a couple of moments. So get those 3 words down. I'll take a drink of water just to give you a few extra seconds. Okay, final one. To what extent did this best ever boss engage you? Now, don't jump into this yet. By engage, I mean, to what extent did this person make you want to bring the best version of yourself to your work? To what extent did this person bring out the best in you, help you do things you didn't realize you were capable of? When I do this exercise, there's a gentleman comes into my mind, and the overriding memory for me is I did things when I worked for this man that I didn't know I was capable of at the time. He continually raised my game, and that's what I call engagement. At the low end of the scale, 1, 2, 3, extremely low end, that's really, this person had zero effect on helping me bring my best game. In fact, they might even have turned me off and made me want to bring less than what I was capable of. So 1, 2, 3 is, at the very best, they had no impact upon my performance. 8, 9, 10 is, I would have run through a brick wall for that person. I did things I didn't know I was capable of working with that person. And then in the middle is somewhere in between. It's so-so, it's okay. So please give them a score. 8, 9, 10 is high, 1, 2, 3 is low, 4, 5, 6, 7 is average. So that was the best boss you ever worked for. For those of you where it's morning time, I apologize for going here so early in your day. I'll help you shake it off later on. We'll have a few laughs perhaps. But I'd just like you to think of the worst boss you ever worked for. And again, write down the name and initials and just start to tune into them. And we're going to do the same exercise, but we're going to do it considerably faster because you've got the sense of what we're scoring them on. So let's look at the way your best boss showed up. To what extent did she or he demonstrate awareness of their mood and emotions? 5 is high, 1 is low, where they obviously tuned into themselves, self-aware, present, and all the other words you would use for that. 5 is high, 1 is low. To what extent did they make others feel appreciated? Everybody all the time, 5. Nobody ever, 1. Anywhere in between, put it in between. To what extent were they open and honest about mistakes? When they dropped the ball, was it, sorry, mea culpa, that was my fault, or who can I blame for this? 5 is high, 1 is low. To what extent did they do the right thing, the honest thing, the moral thing, the ethical thing, making ethical decisions, behaving in an ethical way? 5 is scrupulously honest and ethical. 1 is the exact opposite. What were they like under pressure, particularly? How well did they manage their emotions? We all get sad, bad, and mad, as I said before, but were they capable of managing them in difficult situations and continuing to be effective? 5 is high, 1 is low. And then finally, how good were they at recognition? 5 high, 1 low. Again, adding together the scores, getting a total, which we'll come back to in a couple of moments. Now, for this person, take a few seconds while again I get another drink of water and just write down the first 3 words that come into your mind for how did they make you feel. So if right now, if you want to tune into this, you think, what if it was Sunday night and you knew you were going to be with them on Monday morning? What were the sorts of feelings that you had? When you think now of spending more time with them, or if you thought of going back and working with them again, what sort of words come into your mind? If you feel motivated, excited, joyful, write that down. If it's anything else, write it down. But write down just the first 3 words that come into your mind. And finally, 1, 2, 3 is anything that I did that was good in that job, working for that person, that was me. They did not positively motivate me or engage me to bring the best version of myself. In fact, in some cases, I say they might even have made you want to bring less than the best version of yourself. 8, 9, 10, I did things I didn't know I could do working with that person. I loved it. I was so engaged. It brought out the best thing of the best version of me. And then finally, if it's somewhere in between, so, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so we got those scores. Let me dive straight in and ask you to go back again to the poll And if you didn't tune into the first poll, please help us out on this, because your scores really matter. And hold your camera up to the QR code, or go to pollev.derekm.000 and tell us, what score did you get for the best boss you ever worked for? And I'll wait until we get a couple more scores. I see one has popped up there already. I'll wait for a couple more to come in, because I don't want to bias them and from my suggestions end up affecting the scoring that's coming in. So just put up, what is the score that you got for your best ever boss? Okay. So we're getting a couple coming in right now. So 28 so far is the dominant one. 24, 26 shortly are behind that. We got 9. Oh, the 9 has disappeared. I suspect that was a mistake. So, okay, we're starting to see some kind of a trend here. Let me tell you what we see in the majority of situations when we do this. It is typically north of 20. Very frequently north of 25. And I just want you to notice that score, because when we look at some of the other scores, it's going to be kind of interesting. So just notice that the scores here in general, if I average them out, they're probably 24 or 25 or thereabouts. Now, the poll has just changed on your screen. So tell me, what was the score that you had for the worst boss? And again, just while I suspect, I'd love to know, I suspect that 9 was the 9 that came in the first time. Coming through much faster now. What I just want you to notice is there's a fairly dramatic difference, and this difference is reflective of what we see when we do this exercise all over the world, regardless what sort of audience we're doing it with, regardless what language group, what culture, what organization, what gender, etc. In general, the scores tend to be, in the majority, single-digit scores, as they are here. You get some low double digits, and that's great, because that very frequently indicates that there wasn't an enormous difference between the worst and the best boss. So good for you, you didn't have the worst boss possible. But just want you to notice the scores there. If I average those out, and my mathematics is dreadful, but if I average those out, I suspect we're looking at 9 or 10, right? So first thing I want you to see is 23 up to 28. And here we're going from somewhere like 7 up to perhaps 14, with maybe an average of 9 or 10. So the first observation I want you to notice is the way that they behaved, because that's what you looked at here, is dramatically different. Whatever we were measuring with those behaviors, they are demonstrating, the best boss was demonstrating twice as much, or twice as frequently, as the worst boss you ever had. What were the first 3 words you put in for the best boss? How did they make you feel? So they were demonstrating a very, very different behavioral profile. They were showing up to you in a very, very different way. What impact did that have on you? What are the sorts of things, when you think of working around them and spending time with them, what are the sorts of emotions that come into your mind? How do they feel? Did they make you, here we go. So they made you feel valued, engaged, amazing. Isn't it incredible that people can make us feel amazing? Happy, supported, engaged, happy, valued. Now, that's really interesting. Look how big valued is getting. So we're getting a lot of people hitting that valued, responsible, driven, supported. Again, I think it's safe to say they made you feel those sort of emotions that make it a good, productive day. Because when we feel valued, encouraged, productive, confident, intelligent, responsible, happy, supported, optimistic, yada, 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 well then it tends to put us in a really, really good place, and we tend to bring the best version of us. And we're really getting a great amount of momentum here with this. So this is, by the way, I wonder, do you ever wonder what impact you have on people? Do you wonder, is this the way people feel when I walk in the room? We'll give you an opportunity to find out later on, but I just want you to think, wow, what would it be like if that was the way I made people feel? And somebody made, one of the bosses made somebody feel 27. I'd say 27 is a good way to feel if it's out of 30 or thereabouts. What about the worst boss? What are the words that came into your mind for the worst boss? Anything similar at all? Now, anxious. Right now, look at the press. the overriding emotion that people are describing is anxiety. People are worrying about more things than they ever worried about before. We are so anxious. And as people start to look into the end of the pandemic and go back, they're feeling even more anxious about returning to work. So we don't need to go to work to get anxiety. We can get that for ourselves at home. So feeling nervous around somebody, anxious, scared, unimportant, threatened. Oh, there's an interesting one. I wish we had time to dive into it. Capable. That's interesting. Vulnerable. But the majority of them, drained. Holy God. Anxious, nervous, drained, threatened. Notice the difference between those two sets of words. So the first person was demonstrating many more of the behaviors that we looked at than the second. Probably twice as much, 25 to 10. And the impact upon the way they made you feel was fairly dramatic. Look at these words versus these words. Okay? Very, very dramatic. I think it's very simple. If I said to you, what way do you want to make people feel? I don't think it's this screen to be talking about. So final thing before we unpack that is, tell me, what number did you put down for the extent to which you were engaged with the best boss ever? To what extent did that person make you want to bring the very best version of yourself out? So we got 9s and 10s. Again, I won't bias it. I'll let a couple more results come in. So it's mostly 9s and 10s. 9s, 10s, 9s. Okay, this is typically what we get. So basically, that best boss who showed up in a particular way, behaved in a particular way, made you feel so good about things, and brought out the very best in you. Because one of the most robust findings in the social sciences is that the way we feel has a dramatic impact on our productivity and the way that we perform and show up. Now, there's a 1 in there, there's a couple of people in there, and I think I've seen that once or twice before. It may well be a genuine 1, but I suspect it's probably just somebody has hit a 1 by accident. But the majority here, we're looking at 8, 9, 10s. What about the worst boss you ever worked for? What was the number there? So we got a couple of 3s. We got a 9, and I'm just curious, and I'll just say this while I'm waiting for the numbers. Oh, the 9 disappeared. Forget about it. Sometimes people will put a 9 in, and it means that person annoyed me so much that I worked my tail off to be the best I possibly could, despite them. That's not being engaged. That is being, that's you rising and bringing the best part of yourself in the face of adversity. And often when we ask people what happened next, they say, oh, I left as soon as I could. Notice the difference. Mostly 1, 2s and 3s. So bottom line is, the person who showed up demonstrating more of those behaviors that we had at the beginning, up to 2.5 times more, made you feel a very, very different way. So they had a very, very dramatically different impact on the way that you felt. When compared to the worst boss you ever worked for. And the way you felt had a dramatic impact on the extent to which you were engaged. So this is really, really important learning. And let me kind of unpack it a little bit. One of the most wonderful pieces of news I've heard in the last several weeks was about Maya Angelou, and this is one of my favorite quotations. I always quote it in part of this session, that people will never forget how you made them feel. And Maya Angelou recently was put onto a US coin memorializing the impact and contribution that she made to equality and inclusion. And really fantastic accolade to be paid to a real pioneer. But she nailed it. She said, people will never forget how you made them feel. The way you show up has a big impact on it. So why is this important? Well, the way you show up, or the behaviors you demonstrate, the behaviors your best boss demonstrated, the behaviors the worst boss demonstrated, they determine in large part the way people feel. Think about it. When dad walks into the room full of children, if he's angry, feeling sad, bad, or mad, and he acts out that way, well, there's a dramatic impact upon the room. If he walks in smiling and beaming and joyful, it has a different dramatic impact. So the way you show up, the way you behave, has a dramatic impact on the way people feel. The way people feel determines the extent to which they're capable of engaging. We cannot engage when we're feeling anxious, worried, drained, pessimistic, and all of those other things that you put up there. And then that impacts pretty much everything about the outcome of this relationship. Now, here we're talking about business. But the reality is the way you show up to your family, to your loved ones, to your friends, to the people you work with, to everybody you interact with, it has an impact on the way they feel. And the way they feel has an impact on the extent to which they engage. The extent to which they engage has an impact on the outcome of that engagement. Now, this is not an exercise that I picked out of the air. We took our assessment, which has been developed over the last 20 years or thereabouts, and it has 6 dimensions of emotional intelligence in it. In each of the dimensions, there are 7 specific observable behaviors. So I didn't make these behaviors up. I took one from each of the 6 competencies. So you asked for others. Okay, I've got the wrong ones in there for a different one, but you get the sense. So we picked one from each of those 6 competencies and got you to score them. Now, if you had scored them on the 42 of those behaviors, it would have had would have given you a dramatically more clearer picture, if you like, of the way that person has shown up. But even those 6 behaviors were enough to give you a sense of the difference between the top, the best boss you ever worked for, and the other. Now, this is really important because this is about how do you show up, what behavior do you demonstrate? All of the research at the moment is saying that people post-pandemic are a little bit mistrustful of the way that people are showing up. And in fact, many of them find that their organizations are not walking the walk that reflects the talk that they're talking. So one of the things that we have to do as organizations is actually start to act out and behave in a way that reflects the things that we're telling people. When we were doing some research a couple of weeks ago on emotional intelligence for another series, Aoife used the expression, she said, the difference between talking the talk, talking a good game, and walking the walk is demonstrated emotional intelligence. It's not enough to actually feel for people and to be emotionally intelligent. You must demonstrate it through your behaviors. Now, I'm going to turn back to our panel in a moment, but let me tell you how I would explain this to a 10-year-old, and then I'll throw it to our panel and I'll throw it to you. I would take a very, very simple version of this. And I would say to my grandson is Tommy. He's only coming up to 5, so it'll be a slightly different conversation. But the sort of conversation I'd have is, hey, tell me about the person in school whom you really love spending time with, your best buddy, the person you really love to be around. Oh, that's Aoife. Tell me, how does she make you feel? Give me a few words. How does she make you feel? And of course, he'll give me some of those words. And then tell me about the person that you find it most difficult to be around. Tell me about somebody that you find it's not as easy to spend time with. How do they make you feel? Now, the way I would define emotional intelligence, what Aldous call emotional intelligence, is knowing how to interact and show up to people in a way that you make them feel like your best buddy made you feel. So with that thought, let me swap across to our panel, and let me just make sure I have your audio on. I do have your audio on. And I'm just going to open up and just ask, hey, Rachel, I bet you could improve on the way I said I'd explain emotional intelligence to a 10-year-old.
I think you did a really good job.
Oh.
But one of the things I like to do is just try and talk kids through, what happens when they feel really angry or sad. Like when we're talking about emotions, whether we're watching a film together or reading about a character in a book, just understanding what feelings actually are. Because young kids, they can talk about a car or a cup, but explaining how it feels to be happy or sad or embarrassed or frustrated, and having that vocabulary of understanding emotions is a lot more tricky. And I've even taught, 5 and 6 year olds about what's actually going on in their brains in a very simple way when they feel like that. I mean, in fact, just the other day, my 11-year-old reminded me of something that happens on the tube when she was about 6, when I was explaining to her, literally using this brilliant book about the chimp in your brain that that encourages you, that causes you to behave in a certain way. And I hadn't discussed it with her for about 6 years, and she brought it up very recently that she remembered. So sometimes having that visual image as well helps.
Yeah, and one of the thank you for that, Rachel. One of the policies my wife has always had with our grandchildren is she doesn't talk goo goo gaga children talk to. She talks to them like, even from as young as they are. She talks to them, around concepts, simplifying appropriately, but actually not being afraid to bring out things like the chimp metaphor, if you like, and to go deep like that, because it's amazing how much of that actually sticks, and how much of it actually becomes memorable. Thank you for that, Rachel. Kirsten, is there anything you throw in against that? And by the way, it's okay to talk about 40-year-old children as well, if you want to talk about communicating at the 40-year-old children.
Yeah, I'm totally with. Excuse me. I'm totally with Rachel on this. You can start much younger. I would say 4 or 5 is a good age to start.
Yeah.
And what I like to add is that we all feel emotions, right? And that there's no good and bad. I really like to make that distinction. It's all information.
Yeah.
So for me, the most important parts are there is no good or bad. They are comfortable and uncomfortable. And the other thing that I highlight with my kids and with people in general is that we feel hundreds of emotions during the day. They come and go, so they're not here to stay. So even if right now you're in a state where it feels really yucky, where you're really uncomfortable because you are angry, upset, frustrated, there are ways for you to come out of this, right? So it's not here to stay. We move through different emotions, and so awareness, teaching them to pay attention to what's going on throughout the day and what different emotions they feel, and connecting the dots, right? Like, when do you feel it? A tool that I love, I don't know if in Europe people use it a whole lot. In the US, there's Dr. Dan Siegel.
Oh yeah.
And he started the hand model. So where you explain the emotional brain is the amygdala here, the thumb, and then the thinking brain would be the fingers. And when you're like in a negative emotion or uncomfortable emotion, your thinking brain disengages and you flip your lid.
Yeah,
and so
I love
this
that
tool is
analogy.
really super helpful for kids. Like even when they're smaller and they don't talk a whole lot, they can show you when they're upset. They can go like this. And I remember my son sitting under the table, and he showed me this. He was like, I'm not ready to talk. I'm not ready to come out. This is how I feel right now. And so, you give them tools on how to calm down and bring the lid back down.
Yeah.
And then you're ready.
That's a really great point there. And for those of you who haven't seen Dan Siegel talking about the hand model of the brain, please don't do it now. But if you go into Google or into YouTube and you put in Dan Siegel or Dr. Dan Siegel and put in flip your lid, you'll see him talking to a parent group, and he tells the parents how to understand that themselves. And I love the idea, Kirsten. I have to say, somehow I missed that connection. And it's probably because my kids are a tad older than 5 or 6 years. But I love that idea that you give them that as a tool that they're able to say, hey, look, the lid is up. I think that's so powerful. The lid is up. It'll be back down in time, but leave me alone. The other thing that I think is great there is what you said, that emotions, they come and they go. And there's a suggestion that even Some of the research suggests that even the most impactful of emotions come and go chemically, if you like, or in a reaction sense in the body in somewhere around 90 seconds, unless we grab a hold of them and inadvertently decide that we're going to keep them around longer by spinning on them. So just as you say, letting them go can be tremendously useful. Aoife, is any reactions coming in from the chat from our audience there that or any questions for our panel or ourselves?
Yeah, we do indeed. So I'll throw this question to the group, and maybe we start with Rachel. So, Rachel, someone who works educating and coaching leaders and others on what emotional intelligence is, what do you find are some misconceptions of what emotional intelligence is or isn't, kind of in a work sense?
I feel like sometimes people think it's something that you're either born with or you're not. I mean, there is an element of that. Like if I look at my 4 kids, one of them springs to mind that even from a really, really young age has always had that very kind of empathetic, thoughtful, understanding character. But I believe it is absolutely, once you have that self-awareness and understanding, and that's a lot of the great work that Genos does, is making people realize what are those different elements that equate to emotional intelligence. And it really, really is something like a muscle that you can work on and develop. It's not like I've got it or I haven't. So I think that's really important to appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great point. Thanks, Rachel. And Kirsten, anything you'd add there?
I think one of the misconceptions is that you have to be the super emotional type, like that you have to have those huge emotional swings and be very expressive about it. And that is not what it is. It is like the awareness of which situations, what environments, how do I feel in different environments and situations and with different people, and how do I manage that? So, it's more about awareness and learning the tools of how to manage.
And let me ask you, actually, Rachel and Kirsten, do you ever get people come to you thinking that you're trying to create this unreal environment where everybody is always happy, clappy, ready to hug, singing Kumbaya, that emotional intelligence is all about just being happy and friendly and nice in absolutely every interaction? Do you ever get that sort of sense from people?
I mean, I do. One of the parents that are quite, or people I work with who are quite skeptical, they end up thinking like if we talk so much about emotions and make everyone aware of them, it's kind of making a bigger deal of something that wasn't there. If we start labeling emotions, it's kind of but I feel like if you don't talk about something, all you're doing is shoving it under the carpet for it to appear even many years later down the line. But particularly because I work with parents, there is this fear that if you talk about them like every day, you say, what went well, what didn't go so well, that you're almost like opening up a can of worms. But if you don't, then the behavior, all behavior is a form of communication. It's going to pop up somewhere else. So it's kind of being, whether you're a parent or a colleague or a friend, it's almost like being an emotional container vessel for somebody else that is in that moment struggling to experience with a difficult emotion or challenge.
We've had a great question come in from the chat, Derek. Because I've experienced this in my past. How can you help your manager build emotional intelligence when you are managing up?
Yeah, I'm going to throw that to Kirsten and Rachel as well. My 2 cents on that is the only thing, not quite the only thing, but the main thing you can do is model it. I don't think, there's an old expression, and it probably sounds sexist these days, but it's a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. My father used to say that all the time. Someone convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. So I think when people are ready to make a journey into becoming emotionally intelligent, well, then it's much easier to work with them. But when you're managing upwards, I think the most powerful thing you can do is model what it is to be emotionally intelligent. Of course, it doesn't mean being happy clappy all the time. There was a great expression from, or a great quotation from Aristotle that said, to be angry is easy, but to be angry with the right person, the right place, the right time, for the right reason, that's tough. Now, if he was in 2020, he would say to be angry with the right person for the right reason, the right situation, to the right degree, that's emotional intelligence. But I'm just curious, what would you guys do, Kirsten or Rachel? What would you do if you're working with a boss that obviously needs to be educated in EI?
Well, I think you're right on with your answer about modeling it and bringing it in. There is a lot of research about co-regulation. And so if one of the parties can be that grounded person, then it usually rubs off, right? And so I think it makes sense to work on yourself. And also, we know managers are not always there, right? Like, I mean, they're not always to stay. So, you know, the better you get working on yourself, on your competencies, on your leadership competencies, the better chances you have to actually bypass that manager.
Thank you.
It's so great to be on a panel where everyone's so aligned. Like literally everything everyone is saying, I could say. But I suppose one other little tip is the difference between what's called an I statement and a you statement. So if you want to express something to somebody else that's a little bit tricky and I don't know how to approach this, if you just literally start the sentence with, I feel X, Y, and Z, rather than you are doing this, that, and the other, it allows that person to just hear and understand from your perspective. And when you start a sentence with you, it immediately puts them on the defensive. So if you're gently trying to say to someone, perhaps do it differently, which is very tricky with a manager, just to try to explain the impact that some of the things that they do might have on you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Kirsten, and thank you to the folks on the questions. I'm just looking at our time and we're marching on. There's just a couple of minutes that I just want to finish off. A few things I want to share with you. And one of them is literally share something with you. The problem always with these Q&As is they're always too damn short. You always feel that we're just getting started. And I'll bet more questions are starting to come into the chat right now. Anything that pops into the chat.
We'll know better for next time.
Well, sorry, also we'll also respond to any questions that come in best we can afterwards because they'll be captured as well. So so let me just move that along. He said, trying to move it along, and it's refusing to. Oh, isn't that interesting? My PC has frozen. Only when you're live does your PC frozen, or does your PC freeze? So let me tell you what I was going to say to you, and let's do this with the chat, and Aoife, you can feed it back. I was going to say oh, okay, we got movement, but we don't have a connection. Okay. Something has gone wrong anyway in the technology. So let me just ask you, at this stage, on the back end, I was going to put up another poll that said, how confident do you feel now that you could communicate emotional intelligence to a 10-year-old? So do me a favor in the chat and just pop in a word, highly confident, moderately confident, and not at all confident, and we pop that in. One of the other things I was going to say to you is, if you're looking at this session and you're saying, wow, I wonder what impact am I having on the people around me? Well, then let me suggest something to you. I was going to offer you a gift, and that gift is very simple, the gift of seeing yourself through the eyes of other folks. And I was going to put up a QR code on the screen for you. In the recording, we'll splice that code in and we'll publish it up on the timeline where this recording is as well, so that you can do one of our assessments at no cost. And in doing that, you can invite 2 or 3 of the people who work with you to feedback on the way they see you show up. So you get a sense of, what are the things I'm doing really well, because you want to keep doing those, and what are the things that I could do a little bit better. So if you want to do that, come back to the timeline in about an hour. We'll have a QR code there for you to be able to tune in and sign up for one of those assessments. Next week, we're going to be looking at changing your stress mindset for 2022. Let me make a big boast. In the session next week, if you participate in it, the attitude and the mindset that you have towards stress and towards those things that stress you and make you anxious is going to be dramatically changed. We've done this session on many dozens of times, and what we see is in a very measurable way people's mindset, their approach to stress shifting. So I invite you to come along if you ever suffer stress, which really means if you're human. If you ever suffer stress, come along next week. We're going to be running on Thursday of next week, and it will be how to change your stress mindset for 2022. But just by way of wrapping up, first off, thank you to our panel. Thank you, Aoife. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Kirsten. Thank you to all the folks that have popped in all the questions. And we will see you on the next session. Please God, all technology working, and have a really, really great week. Take care, folks.
Just going to add one quick thing,
Please.
Derek. I put the link for the Genos assessment into the LinkedIn chat.
Good for you.
Folks don't need to worry about coming back later. If they want to sign up there, we'll get notified. We'll be set up. Thank you so much, Rachel and Kirsten. Really appreciate you. We'll talk to you all soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.